The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
The late, great Jim McKay, in announcing the tragedy of the Olympic athletes in 1972, the Israeli Olympians who were killed, said, "Our worst fears have been realized." In a much less tragic sense, though in the context of media, this is tragic. The Washington Post is shutting down its sports department, along with other changes that are coming to a paper that I have subscribed to for nearly 40 years and have read for nearly 60 years, and I will be canceling my subscription immediately. This is absolutely disgusting, but I guess we've been hearing about it for weeks, and it wasn't all that much of a surprise, though. The way the news got out today, there was a all-hands-on-deck meeting that was scheduled for 8:30 this morning. I don't know whether it is still going on, but Matt Murray, who is the editor of the paper, called it, and people who were out of town were told to log on by Zoom to find out the fate of what was once a great newspaper and will soon be a shell of its former self. Not that it hasn't been for a long time, but it has been absolutely, heartbreaking to see what has happened to people I have known and have watched for a long, long time. It is absolutely incredible that this would happen to what I thought would be a paper that would be among the last to go away. I thought that we would have the New York Times, we would have the LA Times, one of the Chicago papers, the Boston Globe, Washington Post would be among them. We've seen papers close up all over the country. And there are reasons for that, including like in Pittsburgh, where they're completely doing away with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. In Atlanta, where we have paper that's only going to be printed. No, I guess they're not even doing a print edition of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. These things have been in progress. But, man, when you think of media in this town, there have been some real stars in sports media for sure, going back to the days of Glenn Brenner and George Michael. And, we've had people who have excelled in radio as well, and we've had a town that is not really a good sports town. Let's be honest about that. And the teams, by and large, haven't been good. We went through 24 years of Dan Snyder ownership of the Redskins. The Capitals did win a Stanley Cup. We went without baseball for 34 years. We got the Nationals. They won a World Series. The Capitals. Although, we've had teams, Maryland, Georgetown, winning national championships. But this is not a great sports town, partly because there's not a lot of blue collar here. That has a lot to do with it. People are busy. That's why the Redskins, Washington football team, Commanders, they've always done well in interest because it's 3 hours of your Sunday to watch. But the Washington Post, not just locally, but nationally, has been among the leaders in sports. And, my family goes back so far with this paper, not just as a family, we subscribed when I was a kid, and that's, partly how I learned to read and certainly to love sports, reading the likes of Shirley Povich in the paper and young reporters who I got to know better over the years, like Len Shapiro, who covered the Redskins. And, I looked forward in the morning to reading the paper, and I have for my whole life. And it was only within the last year I stopped the actual print edition because it was just getting too expensive. It went over $500 a year, and I just felt like I couldn't justify it. So I got the online. I paid $170, and there will be no renewal for that. We're done. We're done with the Washington Post, which is something I never thought would happen. It's a changing landscape, but other papers have figured it out. Other big papers. This is the paper of Watergate. This was the most important media outlet for the most important story of the 20th century. The impeachment of Richard Nixon and his ultimate resignation. That was enormous. Woodward and Bernstein became household names because of that. And the paper is, well, here's the explanation. Murray, in telling them that the sports department will close in its, quote, current form, the paper plans to retain several reporters to join features and cover sports as, quote, a cultural and societal phenomenon, and will have a few employees on its print sports section. Well, we'll see how long the print lasts. He also said that, the kind of things that you would expect him to say, that he said today is about positioning ourselves to become more essential to people's lives in what is becoming a more crowded, competitive, and complicated media landscape. And after some years when, candidly, the Post has had struggles to do that. Well, I would say that you're not positioning yourself to become essential to people's lives. You will soon become non-essential to my life, as I will cancel my subscription, which is just hard to get my head around. They sent 4 to the Olympics. The Olympics are more than just sports. Barry Zerluga was among them, and he was the first that I saw on Twitter to quote Matt Murray as saying that they were closing the sports department. He's there. He's in Italy. He's going to be there for 3 weeks, and he's going to come home without a job, apparently. Now, if I was running the sports department, he's one that I would keep. There are a lot of stories that you're going to have to cover. You got to cover the stadium story. Alex Ovechkin is going to retire. Coaches change on the major sports teams. At some point, there will be a replacement for Dan Quinn. I mean, all those major stories, which we used to say would wind up on A1, like, for example, when Joe Gibbs returned in 2004, and it was bannered across the headlines of the paper, as it should have been. But there's really no paper anymore. There's no heart. There's no soul. There's nothing left of a media empire, really. And what Katharine Graham did with Ben Bradley in leading that paper to prominence in the 70s, helped by the Watergate story, which they had the courage to stay with when other people were abandoning it. It's awful. And I've had some great things happen to me in my career, mostly in radio, over 48 years. But I got to tell you, one of the greatest thrills was when I wrote a couple of freelance pieces for the Post back, 6-7 years ago, and to see my name in print in the Washington Post under a byline was tremendous, just tremendous for me. And I still have those and will cherish those for the rest of my life. But we can say now, I guess, February 4th, Washington Post, rest in peace. And for certain, the sports section, which there is no section anymore, there's only coverage of, what stories that I guess would spill over into what we would call general news. And, I hope that Barry stays. I love reading him. If he doesn't, I'll follow him where he goes. Other friends that I've had there over the years have abandoned it. Not abandoned, found that they weren't going to be in their future. They understood. They saw the handwriting on the wall. Dan Steinberg, who was a big boost to my career, as he chronicled what Zabe and I did in the afternoon for years. We were certainly helped by the boost that we got from the sports blog. He's an editor now, and he's with The Athletic. Nikki Giavallo did a great job covering the Commanders, has moved on to The Athletic, as have other. David Aldridge once wrote for the Post, went to ESPN, now is the editor of The Athletic. I mean, these are changes that are happening in this media landscape, but it doesn't mean that the Post had to just throw up the white flag and get out. I mean, it just seems to me that something could have been done with better management. And I've been through this myself. I never worked for an organization as storied as the Washington Post, but in my radio career, and you kind of accept it as the cost of doing business if you're going to do this for a living, and I've been fortunate to do this for as long as I have. But with a 2-month-old baby and a 6-month-old mortgage, my contract wasn't renewed at WFAN. I helped to build WTEM, spent 25 wonderful years there, and the last 8 under the ownership of Dan Snyder, and it took that amount of time for things to really bottom out, and they did not renew my contract after 25 years. I would have loved to finish my career there. I didn't. And I was in a format change in Dallas in 1983, similar to what happened at the Post today, although our staff wasn't as big, but there were 35, 40 people, and there wasn't a room big enough in the radio station to fire us all, so they sent us down to a television station where they fired us all at once. And for me, it was a lot different than it would be for people who have families and are established at the Post and thinking. And there was a time when if you went to the Washington Post, you stayed there as long as you wanted. There weren't going to be any budget cutbacks. There weren't going to be any buyouts. Shirley Povich was there for 75 years. And now it's apparently over. I mean, there'll be some form of the Washington Post, but the Washington Post ain't the Washington Post anymore. And for me, it's heartbreaking. It really is. And I just think of the people who poured their heart and soul into that paper. And some, were able to use that as a springboard to bigger and better things like Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon, who have built a television show, which it's hard to believe that's coming up on 25 years. But they'll be the first to tell you that show doesn't happen if they don't spend 20 years together working as columnists at the Washington Post. And there's no springboard for that kind of thing anymore. And whoever's going to work there, I don't know about the rest of what they're going to cover. I imagine there'll be some politics and things like that. But it's basically going to be Politico, sounds like, Politico magazine. And I will no longer be a subscriber. What a terrible, terrible thing that the Washington Post, as I say, I go back so far with this. My grandfather was a cartoonist there in the late 20s and the early 30s. And he befriended a fellow Jewish employee at the Washington Post who happened to be covering sports, and his name was Shirley Povich. And he said, "Shirley, why don't you apply to be sports editor?" And he did, and that launched one of the greatest sports journalism careers in history. And it spawned all the people that followed and did great things at the Post, like Dave Kindred and Tony and Wilbon and Sally Jenkins. And, there's two left. Candace Buckner, who I think is an outstanding columnist. If she wants to go someplace else, she will. And Barry Zerluga, the same thing, but who invested himself in this area. He's from Boston, came here to cover the Nationals as a beat reporter 20 years ago and rose to the level of columnist where he's become an excellent one. And now he is in Italy covering the Olympics where he's been fired. I'm not laughing about this. I'm just flabbergasted by it. But he will be coming home apparently without a job unless he agrees to stay as one of the few sports reporters that they will have. They will have to have somebody if they're going to be any semblance of a newspaper, and I don't think they're going to be much of one, but whatever they're going to be, they're going to have somebody to cover sports, and that is going to be part of the picture. All right, let's move on to Super Bowl stuff. And Roger Goodell, there really wasn't a lot of news coming out yesterday. The Drake May shoulder watch is still going on. He's got a banged-up shoulder from the AFC Championship game, but he's telling everybody he's fine, ready to go. We'll see how much it affect that's going to be. But league issues come up, and one of the things that came up in the annual State of the Game address by Roger Goodell, who's changed that too, and everything changes now. So instead of coming out in a suit and standing up at the podium and answering questions, he showed up in sneakers and a sweater and sat on a stool and answered questions about the league, including what is a push, and there's no secret about this, there's a push for an 18-game schedule. Goodell's been saying it for years. Bob Kraft, one of the most influential owners, who's got a team back in the Super Bowl, was on a radio show last month, and he said, quote, "Every team will go to 18 regular season games and 2 preseason games and eliminate one of the preseason games, and every year we'll play one game overseas." And he says, we're going to push like the Dickens for that. Goodell, a little bit softer on it, but when he says we're looking at it, that means they're going to do it. This was Goodell on the proposal for 18 games.
We have not had any formal discussions about it, and frankly, very little, if any, informal conversations. I've heard people talk about it in the context. It is not a given that we'll do that. It is not something that we assume will happen. It is something that we want to talk about with the union leadership. As you know, they're going through a transition, and hopefully that'll get solidified this spring. And as they determine their priorities, we are doing the same on the ownership level so that when we get together, we can address these issues together. And I think you remember in 2011, as part of the CBA, we committed to the players that we were going to have this conversation and we were going to talk about the pluses and minuses. When we moved from 16 to 17, we had that conversation. I think that went quite smoothly. But the challenges will be different here a little bit. And it'll depend on a lot of factors, including safety of the game. What other changes can we make to the game that are going to continue to improve that from a safety standpoint, but also a competitive standpoint? Should we have 2 buys? What are the roster sizes? There are a number of issues that need to be discussed with the players, and that I'm sure will be a focus, or at least a component of the next CBA, at least in the discussion phase. But there are a lot of things that I think are going to be on the table.
So that was Goodell basically dribbling the ball around the court like Curly Neal for a minute and a half. He knows damn well that they're going to shove 18 games down the players' throats. That's what they do. DeMaurice Smith was head of the Players Association, said, no, we're not taking 17. They gave him $1 billion. They took 17. They're going to take 18. It's just a matter of what the price is. And David White is the interim director of the NFL Players Association. They haven't chosen a replacement yet for Lloyd Howell. Why is Lloyd Howell gone after only a couple of years, after DeMaurice Smith finally, threw up his hands and or he was pushed out one way or another? They made a change. They brought in Lloyd Howell, whose background was at Booz Allen. And they found out that he was also consulting with the Carlyle Group, private equity firm, which was interested in investing in NFL teams. So there was clear conflict of interest there. On top of that, there were reports that he was spending NFL Players Association money on strip clubs. So he had to go. That was a gots-to-go situation. So David White is the interim guy, and he's huffing and puffing and making it sound like, oh, no, we can't accept an 18-game schedule. Look at what we have to deal with now. We play Thursday night. We play international games. We play Saturday games. It's too much. We're not going to have 18 games.
They can shorten careers. They can diminish lifetime earnings. And when your average career is already 3 to 4 years, that becomes something that is existential. So the 18th game is not casual for us. It's a very serious issue. It's something that comes out of negotiations, and nothing will move forward until players have the opportunity to account for all of those factors, take that into consideration, and then through negotiations, agree or not to the 18th game. But as it stands right now, players have been very clear. They don't have any appetite for it.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter if you have an appetite for it. And as it stands now means a whole lot something else than as it will stand when this gets done. And this is, as Tom Lavero calls them, a motorcycle gang. They don't like to go without money for long. Remember in 2011 when they had the lockout? You had players borrowing $1 million at 20% interest. That's insane, but that's how their spending goes. So they will be pushed into a corner by the owners. They will be told, hey, we're going to 18 games or we're going to lock you out. And here's what we're offering in money. They'll negotiate the dollar figure, but the money just keeps gushing into the NFL. So the dollar figure that they come up with for the players when they do it is going to be minuscule when you look down the line as to what the 18th game will mean for the owners. They want more product to sell. They've got the 3 exhibition games just so they can throw something at the networks and say, here, this is like an NFL game, pay for it. But if you give them an extra game, and here's something else that you may be feeling now as we head into the Super Bowl this Sunday. You're hearing this around town. I've heard it from friends and people. Oh, man, football season's ending Sunday. What am I going to do? So if you're going to extend it another 2-3 weeks, if the end of February is when they play the Super Bowl, that's not going to bother anybody. This is the number one sport in America by miles. And it continues to just crush in the ratings. In an era where television ratings get smaller, theirs get bigger. And they will have 18 games. You can say, David White, players don't have an appetite for it. Too bad. It's dinner time. Eat. Eat, kids. Eat. So that's where we are right now. Also this, Kansas City Chiefs not in the Super Bowl for the first time in 4 years. This has become, unfortunately, kind of a semi-annual event. Or double, what is it? What would you say every 2 years? Alternate years, whatever. Patrick Mahomes Sr., who was arrested for DUI 2 years ago, arrested again. He was on probation, and he had pleaded guilty to a DWI and had received a 5-year probationary sentence, so he's violated probation, and there's no court date set. But, sad that the best quarterback in the league has a father who's apparently got a drinking problem. And he was an athlete himself, an accomplished one, major league pitcher, pitched for the Twins, the Red Sox, the Mets, the Rangers, the Cubs, the Pirates. Was a significant pitcher and actually finished with a winning record, 42-39. So keep an eye on that. But that's one other distraction that Patrick Mahomes would have had to deal with had he not been hurt. And by the way, hurt late in the season as these games continue to pile up. So, what happens when we get to, if they do get to, as Goodell says, an 18-game schedule with 2 byes, week 20 in the NFL. And I thought there's a chance this year we'd have 2 backup quarterbacks. And if Denver won, we would have had at least one. But we'll have it. We've had Super Bowls with backup quarterbacks and Super Bowls that have been won with backup quarterbacks, and Nick Foles and Jeff Hostetler. But we're gonna have it. It's just too much. And I agree 100% with David White that it shortens careers, that the grind of international games and odd time games, Thursday, Saturday. We've had Wednesday games during Christmas. It takes its toll. And he said there's going to have to be a negotiation. The negotiation is only going to be about money. It's not going to be whether or not they do it. And there will be a price where the players will bend. They will have to. And if it's put to the vote of the players don't think in terms of, this will shorten my career. When you're 23, 24 years old, you think you're going to play forever. And they're not going to think in terms of that. How much money can I make now? Because when you're a football player, more so than any other sport, your next play could be your last. They understand that. They play such a violent game that every game they go into, they say, this could be the last time I ever step on a football field. They accept that as part of what they do. So you're not going to have players thinking about, what's it going to be like in 3 or 4 years when I might have to retire because I'm playing 18 games instead of 17. Doesn't work that way. Coming up, Steve Young with some, I thought, surprising things to say about the Pro Bowl, which was sort of played last night. I didn't watch any of it. I didn't watch 1 second of it. Caught a couple of highlights out of the corner of my eye today. Joke. Absolutely. The score was like in the 60s. I mean, it's just guys going out there and playing grab ass. It's an embarrassment to the NFL. Whatever money they make off of television selling this to ESPN, it's not worth it for the disgrace that it brings to the league. One time, Pro Bowl was different. And if you want to Google something, watch the late Sean Taylor blow up the Bills punter in the Pro Bowl probably 20 years ago. It ain't that way anymore. But Steve Young played in that era, and he's got some interesting thoughts on it as he discussed it yesterday with Dan Patrick. Don't go away. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
If you're just jumping in your car, this is broken within the last 45 minutes. The editor of the Washington Post, Matt Murray, with an all-hands-on-deck meeting, essentially a slaughtering of the staff, 300 reportedly fired in a meeting that began at 8:30 this morning. He announced that they're essentially closing up the sports department. There'll be stories about sports that they'll cover, big stories like the stadium story, when Alex Ovechkin retires, if and when the Commanders get a new coach. I mean, there are big stories that would wind up, as we used to say, on A1. So they'll have to have somebody to cover that. But the traditional sports section where you have game stories and columns, that's all gone. According to this, the various stuff is spilling out on Twitter. This one that the people who were let go immediately, Barry Svrluga was the first to put this out on Twitter that I saw. He's over in Italy covering the Olympics. He's going to be working essentially without a job for 3 weeks and come home. But he's a dedicated journalist. I'm sure he'll do a great job covering the Olympics while he's over there. But the ones who were shown the door, they were cut off from computer access at 9 o'clock this morning, almost a half an hour ago. It also says that dozens of reporters and journalists worked late last night and early this morning to finish stories they had in their process before being shut out. Yeah, these are dedicated people. There are some big stars in journalism who make a lot of money, but you'd be surprised at people who you've been reading in the paper every day how much money they make. It's not a lot. It's what they like to do. It's what they're good at, and it's dedication to a craft that they've always wanted to do. And it's, for all the people who will be okay, who have been there for a long time, will get severance. There are people with families who, haven't been there that long, aren't going to get much severance, and we'll have to find a way to get going. And the landscape is so different now. It's not that easy to jump to another paper. You used to be able to do that even if you're willing to move. There just aren't, other papers are going through the same thing. Whew. What a time we are going through right here. Anyway, I mentioned the Pro Bowl. Such as it is, it's a flag football game, and they call it the Pro Bowl games, and they put it on Tuesday night. For years and years and years, it was the week after either the championship game or the Super Bowl. And as the years went by, players took it less and less seriously. Nobody wanted to get hurt. So they said, okay, let's move it to the week between the championship games and the Super Bowl. There's no football there. People might watch that. It became more and more of a joke. And the players said, no, save it, because they make money off it. So they did. And then finally said, forget it. We'll just do this as throwing competitions, kicking competitions, and we'll play flag football. Flag football's coming to the Olympics, so they can justify a little bit that way. Okay, let's introduce this to people who will be watching it in the summer games in 2028. Okay, all right, fine. But they're just joking around, and you see guys in hats and guys, running off the field and going to the sidelines, coming back on. I mean, it was like, Sunday in the park. And it's a far cry from what it was, especially when Steve Young played in it back in the 90s. Steve Young, a Super Bowl winning quarterback with the 49ers when they won against San Diego, was it 96, I believe. And he's a Hall of Fame player. But he kind of shocked Dan Patrick yesterday when they were talking about a variety of Super Bowl-related items, including the Pro Bowl.
Now, I took the biggest beatings I've ever taken in my football career were at the Pro Bowl. No, you laugh because that makes no sense. Why would the biggest beating? Because you're playing with the elite players in the NFL, and everyone's going on the beach all week, and no one really knows the plays. And now Reggie White doesn't drink, you know what I mean? Reggie White is not hungover. And now it's like, or Bruce Smith, or name it, you know what I mean? And so there are Pro Bowls when I look back and I'm like, this is not right. This is not, I just finished the Super Bowl and now I'm going to the Pro Bowl, and I love being in Hawaii, but I'm not going to take a beating. So it was irrational, and it couldn't be sustained, because it's who's going to go do that and take that risk. And so, but because flag is becoming so big, Dan, I think what's happening is flag was an answer that was kind of cheap answer to the Pro Bowl. I told the guys that, I'm coaching with Jerry, I pulled them aside and said, look, tomorrow when we play, you're representing the fastest growing sport in the world. People are playing it because it's accessible and it's unique. And if you guys play like it's just a, football, light football light, it's not the truth. Flag has its own world now, and it's elite. And I could tell you, if we got an elite men's team to play those guys tomorrow, I think that elite men's team would kill them.
I agree.
So it's like getting them, and you could see their eyes light up. They're like, you're right. We got to make sure that. So I have 2 45-minute sessions yesterday and today to get them ready to go play elite flag football. But I think the Pro Bowl, if we'll keep playing flag, I think it'll become something that they could start to embrace themselves and not just be like, Pro Bowl is a joke,
How does life change for Sam Darnold if he wins the Super Bowl?
Oh, it's already changed. It's changed in a way that he has redefined his career. He's redefined who he is, how he plays in big games. Those are all important. Now,
but it changed your life too.
The Super Bowl now can be the thing that you can, I don't know, in some ways you're a made man right now. You're in a place where you're going for 2, which is just a different world. And so for Sam Darnold, this is huge. And I think playing well, because it is the biggest game, and Sam was we all, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, myself, Dan Marino, it doesn't matter where you start, there's all years of filters and hurdles. And every time you jump one, they're like, well, what about this? Oh, well, he hasn't done that. And so you just spend your whole career trying to just run everything over. And so Sam's had to do the same thing, but further away, because he started with the Jets. That's brutal. He went to Carolina when it was a bad spot for quarterbacks, got to Kyle Shanahan, saw the sun come out. Now we're going to see who is Sam Darnold? Is he really that good? And if he plays well in the Super Bowl, I think that not only redefines his career because he's already done that, I think it puts him in an elite state. And now, next 10 years, does he win 2? Sam Darnold could be the guy, and I think that's kind of cool for him.
He'd be on scholarship. But I look at Drake May like I do Dan Marino. It was like, okay.
Young, yeah.
You know, if he doesn't get it, he'll be back.
How'd that go for Dan?
And Joe Burrow. I mean, I just say don't ever subscribe to that philosophy.
Yeah, one of the most painful.
Because Danny has to, every time he comes on these shows.
It's brutal. I mean, we went to the Hall of Fame together. And so we did a lot of interviews together. And inevitably, someone would go to Dan, well, you didn't win a Super Bowl. And you could see Dan, it just is, and you're like, of all the things that this guy did, and now he has to just drag that around.
But you didn't wear your Super Bowl rings when you were with him, did you?
I did not.
You did not, okay. Like, put your hand on the desk and, like really loud clanging.
You got to remember, Dan and I met the first time.
I remember you telling me.
You got that story. Okay, yeah.
Well, no, you saw him play at Army.
Yeah, at Army.
And you're thinking, oh, my God, we played the same position.
He's throwing the ball differently than me.
Yeah, Dan Marino is a year older than Steve Young. So Steve Young was being recruited at Army, and Army was playing a game against Pitt with a freshman quarterback named Dan Marino, who was on his way to becoming Dan Marino. Now, the fact that he only got to one Super Bowl, different era, I would think, too. This is before it became popular to change teams, even though he spent most of his career. Think about the coaches he played for, 2 Hall of Fame coaches in Jimmy Johnson at the end of his career and Don Shula for the bulk of it. But they never got back to a Super Bowl after his second year. Second year was the breakout year that he had. He was really good as a rookie. But in his second year, in a 16-game schedule, he threw 48 touchdown passes. He opened up the season in Washington against the Redskins, and I believe threw 5 in that game. So if you want to debate how good Dan Marino was, just listen to Joe Montana, who, if he's not the best, I think he's 1A with Tom Brady, even though he has 3 fewer Super Bowl rings, but that could be circumstance too. He says, I'm surprised, Montana says that he believes Marino's the best. That's pretty high praise. I'd yield to the Hall of Famer on that one. One more from Steve Young, and this is kind of a cool thing. He almost played with Bo Jackson. He tells the story that he was with Tampa Bay, and Bo Jackson said to Tampa, do not draft me. If you draft me, I won't play football. I'm going to play baseball. He was good enough to play baseball and might have been a Hall of Famer if he just stayed the whole career with baseball, but he was also the best football player in the country, won the Heisman Trophy at Auburn, but he had been lied to by the Bucs. They wanted to bring him in for a physical before the draft. They knew they were going to take him number 1, and they flew him in on a private plane, and he was told, no, it doesn't violate any NCAA rule violations. He got back to Auburn after the visit, and his baseball coach said, your career's over because you took an improper benefit. And so he said, that's it for the Bucs. He says, I'm not going to play for you. But there was kind of a recruiting visit to soften things up. And Young tells the story that Bo whispers in his ear, they can feed me all this lobster and steak they want. I'm not going to play for them. And he didn't. He wound up going back in the draft the following year. Al Davis took him, went to the Raiders, and you could make the case that Bo Jackson is the greatest player who ever lived in greatest athlete who ever lived, in that he was the baseball all-star MVP and a football Pro Bowler in the same year. I don't think anybody's going to top that. Deion Sanders, pretty good in baseball, really good in football. Bo Jackson, really good in baseball, really good in football. Here's Young with his analysis of the two.
The appreciation as an art form, you'd have to appreciate them in their uniqueness and context because they're not one-to-one. I mean, Deion had speed that was faster than any human I've ever. Now, like, I'm sure there's Olympic sprinters, but on a football field with a helmet on, which is very different, there was speed that I had to, for a little while, I couldn't throw at him because he would do things that belied my eye. You play NFL quarterback, you get a keen sense of what an athlete can do, what a defender can do, and you know how to. You've seen the throws in slow motion when it just misses the fingertips, but we get really good at it. And when somebody is out, like outer space, able to do things that don't make sense to your eye, you got to take a minute. And that's what I did with him. I was like, I'm going to take some time with him because I can't gauge what he's doing. It defies my eye, and he's the one guy that I can say that did that. Now, Bo, I mean, honestly, when I've been with elite athletes in different sports, when we gather, there's certain things that come together, whether it's ESPYs or, there's places where it happens. When Bo walks in, everybody kind of, you can just feel it. Bo is in a unique class of athletes that makes people just go, and Bo's a good friend, so I mean, you talk about irascible. My man Bo, do not get in his way. Funny dude, and I love him, but yeah, he's all that. But as far as the two of them, they're amazing, but they're different because Bo could do the power. You watched his first at bat when he grounds to second and beats it out. Yeah. Then he hits 2 home runs and he breaks the bat over his, leg. It was both of them are a little worldly. You'd want Bo for all the power and Deion for the speed.
Well, you'd want either one of them in football for sure. And in baseball, if you had a first choice, you'd take Bo. But Deion wasn't too bad. If Deion would have totally dedicated himself to baseball too, he might have been among the all-time stolen base leaders. He could certainly leg out an infield hit, and he could hit. If you could hit major league pitching, that's Michael Jordan tried it, and he wasn't very good at it. He was good enough because he was an athlete, but he never got a sniff of the major leagues. Deion was a major league baseball player of some significance. Really incredible how great those two were as athletes. One time the Super Bowl pregame show, I think, started a few minutes before kickoff, like Super Bowl III. And I will get to that. There's an excellent story at SI.com about Joe Namath, which I want to talk about in the next hour. Plus, maybe the most heroic thing we will see from an athlete this weekend, Super Bowl included. Lindsey Vonn is going to compete in the Olympics with a completely torn ACL. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. A lengthy email put out by Marty Barron, former editor of the Washington Post, begins this way. This ranks among the darkest days in the history of one of the world's greatest news organizations. The Washington Post's ambitions will be sharply diminished. Its talented and brave staff will be further depleted, and the public will be denied the ground-level, fact-based reporting in our communities and around the world that is needed more than ever. Can't say it any better than that. Washington Post gutted today. 300 employees fired. Sports section totally shut down. It is absolutely jarring for an entity that has been a part of my life, my entire life. And as I said in the last hour, this goes back to the late 1920s when my grandfather worked there as a cartoonist and befriended a young man named Shirley Povich and encouraged him to become the sports editor, which he became, and worked 75 years at the Post and helped to launch one of the greatest sports sections in the country. I was right there with the Boston Globe, the New York Times, L.A. Times, San Francisco Chronicle, which exposed the Balco scandal with the steroids, supplying the steroids to Barry Bonds and others. Yeah, I mean, that kind of journalism, it's tough to do without people. You need the horses and the resources, and the horses are all gone, many of them, and whatever is going to remain as part of the sports department is not going to be anything like what it was. And we've been hearing about it for a while, so it's not a stunner. But just to watch it all play out on Twitter and see the various people who I've watched, admired, read, have become friends with in some cases, lose their jobs. I've lost mine. It happens. It's a hazard of working in radio. It happens to everybody, and you kind of accept it. But the newspaper business used to be stable. When I got into radio in the late 70s. Newspaper people were rock solid. They had those jobs as long as they wanted them. TV people worked under contract, and radio people were expendable. So some new program director could come in and not like the way you sound, and you could be out the door the next day. That's just the way things were. And if you want to do it, you stay with it. If you don't, you move on to something else. And I've been lucky to stay mostly employed for the last 48 years, but I never thought that I would see the newspaper business go the direction that radio has been for years and years and years. And I don't know what form it's going to take, but I'll probably become a subscriber to The Athletic. That's the only way I'm going to get details on local sports anymore. I mean, it's stunning. It used to be that if I wanted to find out more information about a story, I would go to the Post. Can't do that anymore. That's gone. That's all gone. Two of their star columnists over the years who have transitioned to television, Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon, and they're coming up on 25 years on TV. As some of that time, especially Wilbon, I think the first 10 years of PTI, he remained a columnist. Tony stayed for a few more years, and then more so he was pushed than left. But they've been out for the Post, but they have always talked fondly about their years there. They admire the people who work there. And Tony said this many times. I worked with him for 14 years, and he would say this all the time. He would say, television makes you rich and famous. People get to know you doing radio, and it's the most fun. But he said, newspaper is the hardest thing to do, and writing is the thing I respect the most. And I would have to agree that, the work that the writers have done have fueled what we do here. We react. We don't have the horses and the resources to break stories. But when stories are broken, we react. This is the coal that drives the steam engine. And that ends today with the Post shutting down the sports section. Anyway, Tony and Mike talking about what is a remarkable story. Lindsey Vonn, 41 years old. She comes out of retirement after 6 years. And last weekend, she was injured and suffered what she has revealed to be a completely torn ACL. She is saying, quote, "My knee is not swollen, and with the help of a knee brace, I am confident I can compete on Sunday. As long as there's a chance, I will try. I will do everything in my power to be in the starting gate." She's going to give it a go. Reaction from Tony and Mike yesterday on PTI.
You would think that would keep her out of the upcoming Winter Olympics, and you would be wrong. Vonn, who was in the middle of a brilliant comeback after 6 years of retirement, plans to ski anyway in this Sunday's downhill. She said, quote, "It feels stable, it feels strong. I will do everything in my power to be in the starting gate," unquote. Wilbon, Lindsey Vonn's was a hugely compelling story before this injury. What is it now?
An inspirational story. I mean, there just aren't that many people who would want to try this, much less be able to try this in the Olympics. I mean, when I hear of that injury, Tony, and then a willingness and a courage to play through it, I think of Reggie White. I'm sure there's a few people in various sports over a long period of time, particularly back 60, 70 years ago, when you didn't have the ability to deal with a wrecked knee as you do now and come back in a year. People just had to play or go away, retire. I think of Reggie White. But then when I heard this about Lindsey Vonn, I'm just like, yeah. I mean, this seems to be who she is. The good knee is titanium. So what are we talking about? Yeah. She just seems to be, I'm going to say this, and maybe I'm going to say it anyway. She's a badass. Lindsey Vonn. Who's cooler than Lindsey Vonn? I can't wait to see if she's out there. If she's not, God bless. If she is, can't wait to see it.
Okay. So my feelings are similar to yours. If the question is, what is her story now? Her story is now a movie. It's a blockbuster comic book movie. If she skis, she doesn't have to win. If she skis, it's going to be the biggest story in the Winter Olympics. The only Winter Olympic story that I remember being bigger than this was in Lillehammer with Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. I was there. I wrote about that every day for 2 weeks. If she skis in this, she's on that level. The slight difference is the downhill is actually this Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, where with this figure skating, which came at the end of the Winter Olympics, there was a 2-week buildup for it. I feel like you do. How could you not root for Lindsey Vonn at this point? Especially since where they're going to compete on that course in Cortina, she has won 12 times, which is a World Cup record. And to your other point, downhill skiers are crazy as loons, and you cannot take your eyes off them. Remember Franz Klammer? Remember when he flew off the mountain? Off the mountain.
Yeah.
So, yes,
I mean,
I'd watch.
It's breathtaking.
I will watch.
Tony, the Super Bowl thing is amazing. Look, so in this country, her home country, that's the only place where you won't be the number one attraction for eyeballs and television, because the rest of the world ain't caring about the Super Bowl, no matter what the NFL and all its sycophants wants to tell you. They'll be watching Lindsey Vonn.
Okay, and I understand where you're coming from, Mike, but let's not bite the hand of the NFL, which has made ESPN what it is and has helped to fuel your very successful television show. I love Mike Wilbon, but Wilbon has associated himself much with the NBA, and he does a lot of work with their NBA telecasts. I wouldn't be saying, well, all the sycophants with the NFL. No, there are going to be 120-some million people watching the Super Bowl on Sunday. That's important. It's important to the American culture, and it's really important to your employer. So I wouldn't be calling it sycophants. I would be calling it mainstream. And, you know, Lindsey Vonn and the downhill, it'd be great if you could find the exact time to flip away from the Super Bowl to watch it live, but you can also watch it on YouTube or any of the other outlets after it's over, and it'll take you 2 minutes to watch it. All right, Radio Row. I've done this since 2013, but I bet I did 20 of them. I was a mainstay on Radio Row over the years, and I know how it works. I go back to the first one. It's not acknowledged, but I believe this was the first version of Radio Row. I was at WFAN, and we went to San Diego in January of 1988 to cover the Super Bowl, where Doug Williams had his day with the 4 touchdown passes, Super Bowl 22. And in the hotel lobby of the main media hotel, we had set up the Pete Franklin show. Pete Franklin did afternoons on WFAN, and I was a reporter. I covered the news conferences and filed what we called reports and pieces, and came on with Pete and talked about what was going on with the locker rooms and so forth. And then Dave Sims, who has since become a very accomplished broadcaster, did the Mariners for many years. Now he's the voice of the Yankees on the radio along with Susan Waldman. He was working for WNBC and was doing his show. Those were the 2 stations. And the next time I got back to Radio Row was in Los Angeles in 1993, the Cowboys-Bills first Super Bowl, and it had totally changed. There were probably a couple of dozen radio stations in a hotel ballroom, or it may have been a convention center, I forget. And it was kind of a free-for-all, like Jerry Jones walked in. Believe it or not, the owner of the Cowboys. That would never happen today. But he walks in, and 12 different producers are dragging him by the arm to get him over to their set to do conversations. It has since morphed into something else, and it's kind of like a Turkish bazaar. And you sit there and you schedule interviews with the people who are tied to a product. That's the way it works. You want to get Joe Montana? Well, you get Joe Montana on, you talk about Super Bowl memories, and you spend 2 minutes talking about whatever he's selling, Skechers shoes or Thin Mints or whatever he's doing. And that's how it's done. And there's no free-for-all. It's all scheduled with their handlers. There are PR people that do that. And it's become a tradition, I guess. You know, again, probably where it really bloomed would be 93. So what are we, 33 years into it? And it still goes on. Last one I did was when the Ravens played the 49ers, 2013, in New Orleans. And I miss it in some ways, but some ways I don't. It became kind of a grind after a while. And I don't even know if it was the best sports radio. But Chris Russo has done almost all of them since 1990. And he was on yesterday with Dan Patrick. He's now with Sirius XM, and he also does with Stephen A. Smith on First Take. And he's great. I mean, I got to know him at WFAN when we were both part-timers. I used to drive him home to the city sometimes, and we, he's just a wonderful guy, never big times anybody. and understands who he is. And he was great yesterday talking to Dan Patrick about his Super Bowl memories from what we call Radio Row.
It was 1990. That was the Denver-San Francisco Super Bowl. And I told this story this morning. I'll tell you again. It's a good one. Nobody there. It was just a couple radio stations, Mike and me, the local station. I think probably Eddie Andelman was there and maybe Eskin. So it wasn't a Radio Row thing. So we're there the whole week in New Orleans, and we had Madden and Summerall on. And so Madden and Summerall did that game, and Summerall privately comes up to me and says, keep on doing what you're doing, which I thought, I took that, meaning, the goofiness and all that. So I took that to heart. But Madden comes on with Summerall, and he says, listen, you guys, come to, here's my address. Call me when you come. Come to my hotel this week. I got to show you some stuff. So that week, whatever day it may have been, we went to his hotel, a little boutique hotel on Bourbon Street. We go up in his suite. He sits us down, and he says, watch this. He takes a projector out, and he says, Rice does this, Taylor does that, the tight end. Here's the Broncos, Louis Wright. They don't have a chance in this game. Not a chance. 55-10 San Francisco. That's when I knew I was with Immortals with that prediction, and that was the first one that I went to. And then the first one I really realized where there was a Radio Row, and this is becoming a big deal, was the one in L.A. when Buffalo played the Cowboys. That's the first one, Dan. I know you were doing Sports Center at the time, probably.
Yeah.
That was the first one that I recognized. Wow, look at this. Look at all these radio stations. Because up until then, I was in a lobby, hotel lobby. Then was the first one they put us in a little, in like a little convention room at a hotel.
Yeah.
Was that the one? And that's the, that was the BB one at 53-17. When BB made the great play on Leon Lett on the fumble, and and obviously Dallas killed him. But all those Super Bowls. So I didn't go to the one with Tampa and the Chiefs in the pandemic. I didn't go to that one. But I've been here all these Super Bowls for this time. Even in Minnesota with the cold weather and all that kind of stuff.
How do you walk the line of being entertaining, but also being a diehard sports fan, like being taken seriously, but then being goofy as well?
I think I had trouble with that with the Mike and the Mad Dog days. And I always said this. I knew a lot more about sports than people realized, and Mike was a lot funnier than people realized. Great wit. People thought Mike was an encyclopedia, a little dry. He had a great wit, and people thought I was just a nutcase who didn't know anything about sports. And so you put those two things together, that's why it worked. I used to worry about that a lot, credibility. Here's a guy screaming and yelling. What does he know about sports? You do 5 hours a day on Sirius XM with 8 minutes of commercials for 5 years, from 2 to 7. You can do that. You must know something about sports. And you're the sort of guy. You're a great, we all know what a great sports fan Danny is, and he was a huge listener. So Dan always appreciated what I did with the sports. He always saw behind the scenes. He's a little goofy, but he knows what he's talking about. Yeah. And that's the approach that I've always taken. And never take yourself too seriously. You're talking sports. We're not talking world politics. You're talking sports, have fun. So I don't worry about that after I used to with Mike, because I was in competition with Mike. I wanted to keep up with him. And I thought if I didn't, I would be looked down upon. I don't worry about that anymore. I'm 66 years old. Just do this stupid show, for crying out loud.
Yeah, it's a clinic. That's exactly the way you have to think. And not, having known him for almost 40 years, and have seen him mushroom into what he became with Mike Francesa, the Mike and the Mad Dog show, and now on his own. He's been on his own for quite a while. Remember, they broke up. I think it was like 2009, something like that. After 19 years, they broke up, and they both had success independently. I would argue that Chris had better success because he understood the whole picture. He's able to combine entertainment with information, not take himself seriously, and be incredibly likable. Mike, although he's popular, and having been on as long as he has, that's a credit to him. He now does a podcast. Doesn't have quite the profile that that Russo has, but Mike tended to take himself a little bit more seriously. I do both of them, and Mike and I were not really friends. He was pretty aloof. Whereas, Russo would be the guy, throw his arms around you, give you a big hug. He's exactly off the air like he is on the air. And Francesa is arrogant. And so this is after they broke up. Mike continued to do the afternoon show on WFAN by himself. And he was on Radio Row for the Super Bowl. This is one of the classic Francesa outtakes or the Francesa pieces. There's a site called Funhouse where they take, Francesa and other people's sound bites, and they make them into something entertaining. So this was Francesa at the Super Bowl. It's got to go back, 9-10 years. And I told you about how it operates, where athlete comes with product. So it's kind of a quid pro quo on every conversation that you have. So Francesa says he's not going to do that, and this is what unfolds. This is Mike Francesa at the Super Bowl. Got to be at least 10, 11 years ago.
We'll do a couple of things. Definitely haven't overloaded the shows with a bunch of just a parade of players. Because listen, that's what this has become. It's become an economy of players who want to get paid to hawk products, and that's what they do, and they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so that's not what we're going to be about as we get ready to hit Atlanta. So we'll try to see what other interesting things we can kind of hook onto.
A buddy of mine turned me on to this product. I tried it for like 3 or 4 months, and I noticed the difference, and I've been taking it ever since.
And they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so.
X-Tech, you wear these guys yet?
Man, I switched out my pads last year.
And they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so.
What do you got going on now?
Okay, today I'm partnering with Genesis. I got to drive this car for about 2 weeks.
It's a nice looking car.
It's a G70.
It's a nice looking car.
They got G80s, G90s.
And they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so.
All right, tell me what you're talking about,
we're talking about Pure Sports Recovery.
And they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so.
Tell me about this thing you got going on.
Oh, my, your son, your kids are going to love this.
Yeah, because I know they play their buddies, and I didn't even realize, that there was Madden Money, and they play each other, and I didn't even realize this stuff went on, to be honest.
And they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so.
All right, what's going on? What do you got going on here?
Well, I'm representing Aztec Pass.
Oh, yeah, I know them well.
Yeah.
I know the guys well, from New Jersey.
Yeah, they're from New Jersey.
Up in my neck of the woods, so I know them well.
Bob Bodrick and Jack Merritt.
And they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so.
All right, talk about Nutrisys for me. You're always doing the Nutrisys stuff. I see everywhere.
So it's been, we've
been doing that a long time.
It's been over 10 years now, and
they just line up and hawk products. Well, we're not very much into that stuff, so.
Go to Macy.com. That's the website at Macy, MACI.com.
Good to see you as always, Simon.
Good to see you, Mike.
Pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, back after this.
Yeah, nobody's hawking products. Nothing but hawking. So that's just great. We're not going to let them do it. Yeah, they let them do it. It's the way the wheels run. That's the grease in the wheels. It's the way it is, Mike. Either you don't want to do it or you do it on Radio Row and you play by the rules. And those are the rules. You want the guests, you got to hawk the products. Hawking. Tough day in journalism, tough day for me personally. And I wish the best for all who are being laid off at the Washington Post and have to figure out how I absorb my sports, because that has been a big part of my life, all my life. And very sad that the papers is basically shrinking to a shell and dropping sports entirely. Bram is next. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.